The envelope arrived on an August morning, elegant and creamy, with golden calligraphy that screamed ostentation. Maya Torres held the paper between her fingers, feeling the weight of irony before even opening it. Her name was written with a false delicacy, as if she were a beloved old friend being invited to a special celebration. But Maya knew Lucas Grant far too well to believe in coincidences. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered, carefully tearing open the side of the envelope. Inside, in golden letters on ivory paper, was the confirmation of her suspicions. Lucas would be marrying Olivia Park the following month, at an exclusive vineyard in Cape Cod. The date was set for a September Saturday, in an outdoor ceremony overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. If you're enjoying this story and want to know how Maya will face this situation, hit the like button now. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss a single moment of this emotional journey. Comment below, would you go to this wedding? Now let's continue to see how this decision will change everything. Maya laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. 3 years after the divorce, after all the arguments about her professional obsessions and her inability to relax, Lucas had finally found someone who fit his vision of a perfect life. Olivia Park, 27, a digital influencer specializing in luxury lifestyle, was everything Maya had supposedly failed to be. Feminine, carefree, always ready to smile for the cameras. Maya's apartment in Cambridge reflected her personality in ways the home she had shared with Lucas never could. The walls were decorated with emergency course certificates, photos of rescue teams, and maps of disaster zones where she had worked. An entire bookshelf was dedicated to crisis management and meteorology manuals. It was the sanctuary of a woman who had found her purpose saving lives when nature showed its cruelest face. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Ethan Cole, his deep, familiar voice bringing the warmth she needed at that moment. "How was your day at the office?" he asked, and Maya could picture his genuine smile on the other end of the line. "Interesting," she replied, still holding the invitation. "Lucas is getting married next month." Silence on the other end. Ethan knew the whole story. The 6 years of marriage, the constant arguments about Maya's work trips, the way Lucas always belittled her career as a Red Cross emergency coordinator. He also knew the cruel way the marriage had ended, with Lucas claiming that Maya loved natural disasters more than she loved him. It was an accusation that had hurt deeply at the time, especially because it carried a seed of truth that Maya had never been able to completely deny. She truly did feel more alive during emergencies, more useful, more herself when coordinating evacuations or setting up shelters for the displaced. The work gave her life meaning in a way Lucas's social dinners and concern with appearances never could. "And how did you find out about this?" Ethan's voice was careful. "He sent me an invitation." "He did what?" Maya explained about the envelope, about the venue, about Lucas's obvious desire to parade her as the failed ex-wife in front of all their mutual friends. It was a typical move for him, petty, calculated, and designed to wound her publicly. Lucas had always been a master of subtle psychological warfare, the kind of man who could make someone feel small without ever raising his voice or using explicitly cruel words. "You're not going, obviously," Ethan said, and Maya could hear the irritation rising in his voice. Ethan Cole was the complete opposite of Lucas in almost every imaginable way. Where Lucas was polished and calculating, Ethan was genuine and straightforward. Where Lucas cared about appearances and social status, Ethan cared about substance and character. They had met 2 years earlier, when Ethan was working as a paramedic during a relief operation Maya coordinated after a flood in western Massachusetts. It had been one of those instant connections that surprise even the most skeptical about romance. Maya was organizing the evacuation of a nursing home when Ethan arrived with his ambulance. Amid the chaos of sirens, people screaming, and rising water, they worked together as if they had been partners for years. Ethan never questioned her authority, never tried to take over, simply followed her instructions with a calm competence she immediately admired. Later, when the emergency had passed and everyone was safe, Ethan found her at the improvised command center she had set up in a local school. He was still in his paramedic uniform, dark hair, messy from rain and stress, but his dark eyes shone with something she recognized as genuine respect. "I've never seen anyone coordinate an operation like that," he had simply said. "You saved many lives today." And Maya, accustomed to Lucas's polite but empty compliments, was touched by the obvious sincerity in his voice. When he asked if she would like to grab a coffee after they finished the reports, she said yes without hesitation. But as Ethan spoke on the phone about not going to the wedding, something lit up inside her, a spark of defiance that had been smothered during years of marriage to Lucas, but now burned at full strength. Maya Torres had coordinated evacuations during Category 4 hurricanes, managed shelters for hundreds of displaced people, and kept calm while storms devastated entire communities. She would not be intimidated by a petty man and his pathetic power game. "Actually," she said, surprising even herself, "I think I will go." Maya ... double quotes. Ethan's voice carried concern, not possessiveness. It was one of the things she loved most about him, his ability to care without trying to control her. "It's not about him," she explained. walking to the window of her apartment and looking at the Cambridge trees swaying in the late summer breeze. It's about me. For 6 years, I let that man make me feel inadequate. I let him convince me that there was something wrong with me for caring more about saving lives than about charity galas. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I need to go there and prove to myself that I can be in that place, with those people, and walk out with my head held high. I need to show that I've become someone better, stronger, more complete without him. And what if it's a trap? What if he's just trying to hurt you publicly? Maya smiled, and this time, there was real humor in the sound. Then he'll find out that I'm no longer the insecure woman who married him 9 years ago. I'm someone who saved lives during Sandy, who coordinated rescue operations during Irene, who looked category for hurricanes in the eye and didn't blink. If Lucas Grant thinks he can intimidate me at a party, he is very mistaken. The following 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation and reflection. Maya chose a navy blue dress, elegant but not flashy, something that said, "I'm fine. Thank you," without screaming, "Look at me." The color complemented her dark brown eyes and contrasted beautifully with her tanned skin, the result of years working outdoors during emergency operations. She spent hours at the salon, not out of vanity, but as part of her psychological armor. Every detail had to be perfect. Dark brown hair cut in a sleek bob that would look good even in the wind. Subtle yet flawless makeup that would withstand any situation, manicured nails in a neutral shade that wouldn't show wear. Ethan, initially reluctant, agreed to accompany her after she explained she needed to do this for herself. "It's not about Lucas," she said one night, as she carefully folded the dress into her suitcase. "It's about proving to myself that I can be in that place, with those people, and walk out with my head held high." "And what will you feel when you see him marrying her?" Ethan asked, sitting on the edge of the bed, watching her with that calm intensity that always reassured her. Maya stopped packing and considered the question honestly. "Relief, I think. Relief to know we are no longer each other's responsibility, that he can be happy his way, and I can be happy mine. And if you don't feel relief, and if you feel something else." She sat beside him, taking his calloused hands that had saved lives, that held her with tenderness, that had never been raised in anger or frustration. "Then I'll deal with that too. But I can't spend the rest of my life hiding from ghosts. And with you by my side, I feel like I can face anything." Ethan watched her from the doorway, his dark eyes filled with concern and admiration. He understood better than anyone Maya's need to face her ghosts. As an army veteran who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, he knew about courage and about the battles we sometimes must fight just to prove our own strength. His military experiences had left scars, some visible, others not, but they had also given him perspective on what truly matters in life. He had seen comrades die for causes they believed in, had held the hands of strangers as they took their last breaths, had learned that life is far too precious to be wasted on pettiness and ego games. "Then we'll go," he said simply. "But I'm driving." The night before the trip, Maya had a strange dream. She dreamed she was standing on a beach during a storm, watching giant waves approach the shore. But instead of running, she stood firm, shouting instructions to people she couldn't clearly see. When she woke, the dream felt more like a memory than a fantasy, leaving her with an eerie sense of premonition. The drive from Boston to Cape Cod took 2 hours on a sunny September morning. Maya spent most of the time looking out the window, watching the familiar New England landscapes. The trees were already beginning to show touches of red and gold, promising the autumn ahead. The sky was clear, a perfect blue stretching to the horizon where it met the ocean. The route took them through small towns Maya knew from previous emergency operations. They passed through Marshfield, where she had coordinated evacuations during a particularly severe winter storm. They saw Situate, where she had set up a temporary shelter for families displaced by floods. Each town brought memories of people helped, lives saved, communities rebuilt. "You've saved a lot of people around here," Ethan observed, noting her pensive look. "It's strange," Maya replied. "During my marriage to Lucas, I always felt like my work was an inconvenient hobby, like it was something I did to seek attention or prove a point. But looking at these towns now, remembering the people I helped, I know I have found my purpose." But Maya couldn't shake an odd feeling, a restlessness she knew well after years of working in emergencies. It was the same feeling she got before major storms, as if the very air was tense, charged with dangerous possibilities. She had learned to trust those instincts over the years. They rarely failed her. "Did you check the weather forecast?" she asked Ethan as they neared Cape Cod. "Perfect day for a wedding," he replied. But there was something in his voice that didn't sound entirely convinced. "Why do you ask?" Maya shook her head, trying to push the feeling away. Maybe it was just nerves about seeing Lucas again, and that entire world she had left behind. Maybe it was the pressure of having to play a role in front of people who once judged her and found her inadequate. Or maybe it was something else. Maya had learned through years of emergency work that nature rarely warns before showing its strength. Hurricanes change course without notice. Floods appear under seemingly clear skies, and people who think they control their lives discover that control is only an illusion when greater forces come into play. The Vineyard Bluffs resort appeared on the horizon like something out of a luxury wedding magazine. The vineyard stretched across gentle hills, descending toward rocky cliffs, where the Atlantic Ocean extended in endless blue. The property was a postcard dream. Vineyards arranged in perfect rows, a colonial-style main house built in solid stone, and several smaller buildings scattered across meticulously maintained grounds. The place screamed money and taste, exactly the kind of venue Lucas had always dreamed of for important events in his life. Maya remembered when he had suggested renewing their vows in such a place for their 5th anniversary. At the time, she had refused, arguing that the money would be better spent on a trip where they could truly relax together. Now she realized that had been just one more of the many times she had failed to understand what really mattered to him. "Wow," Ethan murmured, as he drove along the perfectly maintained gravel driveway. He really spared no expense. Maya felt a familiar pang of inadequacy, the same one she had often felt during the marriage when Lucas took her to events where she never quite fit in. But this time was different. This time she took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and remembered who she had become over the last 3 years. She was Maya Torres, Senior Emergency Coordinator for the American Red Cross. She had saved lives during Hurricane Sandy, when devastating waters flooded entire communities along the East Coast. She had coordinated shelters that housed thousands of displaced people during multiple emergencies. She had worked in disaster zones where the difference between life and death depended entirely on her quick, precise decisions. She had been present when families lost everything and needed to rebuild from scratch. She had held frightened children's hands during storms, comforted parents who didn't know if their kids were safe, coordinated family reunifications that ended in tears of joy instead of despair. A pretentious wedding in Cape Cod, no matter how elegant and intimidating it seemed, would not make her forget her own worth. The parking lot was already full of expensive cars. Gleaming Mercedes-Benzes, sporty BMWs, a few silent Teslas that probably cost more than Maya earned in 2 years. She recognized some of the vehicle's friends of Lucas who had chosen sides during the divorce, naturally siding with the man who offered better parties, more lucrative networking, and access to a social world she had never been able to navigate easily. "Ready to?" Ethan asked, turning off the engine of his practical, reliable Subaru Outback, which looked humble among all those status symbols, but had carried them through snowstorms, flooded roads, and rough terrain during countless emergency operations. Maya looked at him, this man she had found when she least expected to love again. Ethan was everything Lucas had never been. Genuine, supportive, proud of her career and ambitions without needing to diminish them. He worked as a chief paramedic at Massachusetts General Hospital and as a certified first aid instructor for emergency teams across the state. He had never shown any resentment toward her demanding job, had never suggested she should slow down or focus on more important things. Instead, he supported her in ways Lucas had never understood. When Maya had to travel to coordinate relief operations, Ethan watered her plant, collected her mail, and sent her messages of encouragement. When she returned exhausted and emotionally drained from particularly difficult situations, he held her without asking questions, offering silent comfort until she was ready to talk. "Ready?" she said, and this time she truly meant it. They walked down the driveway toward the ceremony site, which had been set up on a flat area with a direct view of the ocean. The setting was genuinely breathtaking. White chairs arranged in perfect rows, decorated with pearl-colored satin ribbons and white flowers that had probably cost more than many people earn in a month. An elaborate arch marked the altar, entwined with white roses, blue hydrangeas, and green foliage that created an elegant contrast against the infinite blue of the ocean. About 50 people were already mingling in the pre-ceremony cocktail area, all dressed as if they had stepped out of the pages of Vogue or GQ. Maya recognized familiar faces. Lucas's colleagues from the corporate law firm where he was a partner, friends from the exclusive golf club where he played every Saturday, a few wives who had treated her with polite coldness during the marriage, as if they could catch her ordinariness by association. And then she saw him. Lucas Grant stood near the makeshift bar, elegantly positioned with the ocean as a backdrop, a glass of crystal champagne in hand, laughing at some joke one of the groomsmen had told. At 38, he was still attractive in the traditional style he had always cultivated carefully. Dark hair perfectly styled with expensive products, a Hugo Boss suit that fit without a single wrinkle, the confident smile of someone who had never truly been challenged by life or forced to question his own worth. For a moment, Maya felt the familiar pang of all those years shared. There was a time when that smile had been for her, when those hands had held her tenderly, when she thought they could build a life together based on mutual respect and shared goals. She had loved his confidence, his ability to navigate social situations with ease, the way he could make anyone feel important in conversation. But the nostalgia lasted only an instant before being replaced by something stronger, the memory of all the arguments, all the times he had belittled her dreams and ambitions, all the smallness of spirit that had slowly suffocated their marriage like a plant deprived of sunlight. She remembered the time she had returned from a particularly difficult relief operation, a flood that had left 12 people dead and hundreds Homeless and Lucas had complained that she had missed the senior partner's birthday dinner. She remembered how he always referred to her work as her save-the-world hobby, as if it were a teenage phase she would eventually grow out of. Lucas saw her at that very moment, and Maya watched his expression shift from genuine surprise to something that looked almost calculated satisfaction. He had bet she would come. He had counted on her curiosity, her pride, perhaps even on some lingering feelings he could exploit to feel superior. This invitation had been a carefully laid trap, and she had walked right into it. But as Lucas began to move toward her, likely preparing some condescending remark about her brave presence, Maya felt Ethan position himself slightly in front of her, not in a possessive or controlling way, but protective, supportive, the way a real partner would. Maya. Lucas's voice was exactly as she remembered, smooth, controlled, shaped by years of legal and social practice. With a hint of superiority he probably thought others couldn't detect. "What a wonderful surprise to see you here. I really didn't expect." He left the sentence hanging, as if her presence were simultaneously surprising and slightly inappropriate. It was a technique he had mastered, making comments that sounded polite on the surface, but carried layers of cruelty underneath. "Lucas," she replied with a polite but distant nod. "Congratulations. This place is truly impressive." Her voice was calm, controlled, professional, the same tone she used when coordinating emergency operations with local authorities who initially doubted her competence. His eyes shifted to Ethan, assessing, measuring, calculating. Maya could almost see the gears turning. Who was this man? How did he compare to him in career and social standing? What kind of relationship had Maya managed to build after her failure as a wife? It was typical of Lucas to reduce everything to competition and comparison, and this must be. Lucas left the question hanging, extending his hand with the smile he reserved for important clients. "Ethan Cole," Ethan said, extending his hand with a genuine smile that contrasted sharply with Lucas's performance. "Pleasure to finally meet you. Maya has told me a lot about you." Lucas shook his hand, and Maya recognized that calculatedly firm grip he always used to establish dominance in first business encounters. But Ethan didn't seem impressed or intimidated. He simply smiled, returned the handshake with appropriate firmness, and let go when the greeting ended naturally, without trying to win a competition that existed only in Lucas's mind. "Well," Lucas said, clearly disappointed at not having provoked more reaction or insecurity, "I hope you both enjoyed the party. The ceremony starts in half an hour, and Olivia looks absolutely radiant." There was something in the way he said "you both" that carried a subtle condescension, as if Maya's relationship was touching but temporary, a recovery phase before she realized she had made a mistake in leaving him. As he walked away, Maya felt a strange mix of relief and anticipation. The first encounter was over, and she had stood firm, managing to keep her dignity intact. But she knew the real test was yet to come. She would have to watch the man who once promised to love her forever make the same promises to someone else. What she didn't know was that 200 miles to the south, in the warm waters of the Atlantic, the winds were shifting in ways meteorologists were still trying to understand. Hurricane Helena, which had been expected to safely track out to sea, according to every forecast that morning, had made an unexpected and dramatic turn northward, and Cape Cod, with all its elegant vineyards, perfect weddings, and petty social games, lay directly in its path. The ceremony began promptly at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, with the sun still shining brightly over Cape Cod, creating that perfect golden light wedding photographers charge thousands of dollars to capture. Maya and Ethan had found discreet seats near the back of the guest section, where they could observe without drawing unnecessary attention or becoming part of the spectacle Lucas had so carefully orchestrated. 200 guests settled into glossy white chairs, all whispering admiration about the flawless setting and breathtaking ocean view. The sea stretched endlessly blue to the horizon, dotted occasionally with white sailboats that looked as if they had been positioned on purpose to complete the perfect visual composition. A string quartet played Pachelbel's canon as guests settled in, the classical music blending softly with the sound of waves breaking gently on the rocks below. It was exactly the kind of environment Lucas had always dreamed of for important moments in his life. Elegant, impressive, designed to create memories that looked like they had been lifted from a romantic film. Maya watched the bridesmaids walk down the makeshift aisle 5. Young women impeccably dressed in blush tones that perfectly complemented the flowers and overall, they all looked as though they had stepped out of a lifestyle catalog, with that polished, uniform beauty that comes from access to the best hairstylists, makeup artists, and personal trainers money can buy. Then came Lucas, walking with the confidence of a man who had never doubted this moment would arrive. His tuxedo was perfectly tailored, likely costing more than Maya spent on clothing in an entire year. He nodded subtly to friends in the audience, his smile radiant and utterly convincing. To any casual observer, he looked like a genuinely excited groom about to marry the love of his life. But Maya knew him far too well not to notice the subtler signs. The way his eyes scanned the crowd, checking who had shown up and who was impressed. The way he positioned himself at the altar to get the best angle for photographs. the slight adjustment in posture when he noticed the main photographer focusing on him. For Lucas, this wasn't just a wedding, it was a production, a public declaration of his success and elegance, an opportunity to demonstrate that he had won the divorce by finding someone better, younger, more fitting to his social standards. And then Olivia Park emerged from the main house like a vision out of a modern fairy tale, and Maya had to admit she was genuinely stunning. Her wedding gown was a couture masterpiece. Delicate French lace over pure silk, with a train that floated behind her like sea foam. The design was at once classic and contemporary, traditional yet touched with modern elements that displayed both good taste and significant financial investment. Olivia was truly beautiful in a way that transcended makeup and expensive clothing. She had that youthful, radiant beauty that seemed to shine from within, blonde hair cascading in perfect waves over her shoulders, flawless skin that seemed never to have known stress or real worry. At 27, she embodied everything society said a bride should be: young, beautiful, radiant with happiness. As Maya watched Olivia walk down the aisle to Mendelssohn's Wedding March, she felt a complex mix of emotions that surprised her. There was no envy of Olivia's beauty. Maya had reached a point in her life where she felt comfortable with her own looks and achievements. Nor was there resentment over her youth at 32. Maya knew she had gained something no amount of youth could buy: experience, wisdom, and a clear sense of purpose. Instead, she felt something closer to pity. Olivia was so young, so clearly in love, not just with Lucas, but with the romantic idea of what she believed her marriage would be. Maya could see in the young bride's eyes the same naive hope she herself had felt 9 years earlier, the belief that love would be enough to overcome fundamental differences in values and priorities. But as Maya watched the wedding procession, her attention was drawn to something on the horizon that made her stomach tighten with professional concern. As an emergency coordinator, she had developed an almost supernatural instinct for atmospheric changes, a sensitivity to shifts in the environment most people never developed. The clouds she had noticed casually during the drive were growing alarmingly, becoming denser, darker, and definitely closer. They piled on the southern horizon like a solid wall, moving with a speed that indicated powerful pressure systems at work. They were still distant, maybe 50 or 60 miles away, but moving at a pace that left her deeply uneasy. Maya discreetly checked her phone, opening the weather radar app she always kept updated. What she saw made her heart race and her mouth go dry. Hurricane Helena, which the morning's official forecasts had projected to safely pass out to sea, had made a dramatic and unexpected shift in course. The latest satellite images showed the storm moving directly toward the New England coast, with Cape Cod positioned squarely in the center of its projected path. Worse, Helena was rapidly intensifying over the warm Atlantic waters, with sustained winds that had risen from 85 miles per hour to 105 miles per hour in just 3 hours. "Ethan," she whispered urgently, discreetly showing him the phone screen as the officiant began speaking about the sacred nature of marriage. Ethan studied the satellite image, his brow furrowing as he processed the information with the experience of someone who had faced weather emergencies both as a paramedic and as a military veteran. During his tours in Afghanistan, he had learned to read desert storm signs, and the skills translated surprisingly well to civilian situations. "When will it hit?" he murmured back, keeping his voice low enough not to disturb other guests. "If it keeps this speed and direction, 2 hours, 3 at most." They exchanged a look heavy with meaning. Both knew what a Category 2 hurricane could do to an exposed coastal area like Cape Cod. Both had seen the damage lesser storms had caused in prepared communities. In this wedding celebration, with 200 people in temporary structures in a fully exposed oceanfront area, was nowhere near prepared for anything stronger than a mild breeze. Maya glanced around at the other guests, all completely absorbed in the romantic ceremony unfolding before them. Small children sat on their parents' laps, elderly guests who might struggle to evacuate quickly, people dressed in formal clothing completely unsuited for weather emergencies. The entire area was positioned in the lowest parts of the property, vulnerable to both winds and the storm surge that would certainly accompany Helena. The officiant was speaking of eternal vows as the wind began subtly to rise, making the decorative ribbons on the chairs flutter more forcefully. Maya noticed that some guests had begun to glance occasionally at the sky, where darker clouds were now visible even to casual observers. "We need to at least try to warn someone," Maya whispered to Ethan. "Who's going to believe us, especially here, today?" It was a valid and painful question. Maya knew exactly how she would be received if she tried to interrupt Lucas's wedding with hurricane warnings. She would be seen as the bitter ex-wife trying to sabotage his perfect day, the disaster-obsessed woman trying to draw attention to herself at an occasion meant entirely for others. But as she weighed her options, Maya felt the familiar weight of responsibility pressing down on her. In 12 years of emergency work, she had learned that information saves lives, but only if communicated effectively and taken seriously. And she knew Lucas far too well to doubt how he would react if she tried to intrude on his triumphant moment with weather concerns. The ceremony continued with Lucas and Olivia exchanging personally written vows, each word carefully rehearsed and designed for maximum emotional impact. Maya listened as Lucas promised to be Olivia's safe harbor in all of life's storms, offering stability and protection against any adversity they might face together. The irony was almost unbearable. The man who had abandoned his first marriage the moment they faced real difficulties, his inability to accept the demands of Maya's career, his need for her to be someone she simply wasn't, now presenting himself as a reliable refuge against life's storms. "Olivia," Lucas said, his voice carrying that practiced sincerity Maya remembered from important courtroom hearings, "you brought light into my life when I needed it most. You showed me it's possible to build a home based on joy, peace, and shared priorities. I promise to be your partner, your protector, and your best friend forever." Maya had to admit the words were beautiful, and Lucas delivered them with apparent conviction. But she also noticed how he had structured the vows to implicitly contrast with his previous marriage. Joy versus her supposed seriousness. Peace versus the stress of her career. Shared priorities versus their different values. Even in his own wedding vows, Lucas couldn't resist making a subtle commentary about how Maya had been inadequate as a wife. "With the power vested in me by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts," the officiant declared as the wind continued to rise. "Now strong enough to make some women hold their hats, I pronounce you husband and wife. Lucas, you may kiss your bride." Applause erupted from the crowd as Lucas kissed Olivia dramatically, dipping her back like a scene from a classic romantic movie. Professional photographers captured the moment from every possible angle, ensuring the perfect image would be preserved for wedding albums, social media, and future conversations about how magical everything had been. Maya barely registered the romantic display. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the clouds were now visibly darker and unmistakably closer. The wind had shifted direction as well, now blowing steadily from the southeast with growing intensity that made the decorative flowers sway violently and began to unravel carefully arranged hairstyles. Some people in the crowd had begun to notice the atmospheric changes. Maya saw a mother with a small child glance nervously at the sky, saw an elderly man frown as he watched the gathering clouds. But most guests were too engrossed in the celebration to pay attention to the warning signs nature was sending. As guests began moving toward the reception area, large white pavilions set on a relatively flat stretch between the vineyard and the rocky cliffs. Maya made a decision she knew could have disastrous social consequences, but one her professional conscience would not allow her to avoid. She had to at least try to alert someone in authority about the approaching storm. "I'm going to talk to the event coordinator," she told Ethan, her voice carrying the determination he recognized from other crisis situations. "They need to know about Helena. Want me to come with you?" "No, better if I go alone," might seem less alarmist. She found James Mitchell, the Vineyard Bluffs resort coordinator, overseeing a team of servers setting up cocktail service near the main pavilion. Mitchell was a middle-aged man with that polished, slightly condescending efficiency that comes from years of organizing high-end events for demanding wealthy clients. He was checking a detailed list on an expensive clipboard, coordinating perfect timing between beverage service, photographers arriving for group sessions, and preparations for the 5-course dinner that had probably cost $50,000. "Mr. Mitchell," Maya approached with the professional tone she used when she needed to establish credibility quickly. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to speak with you about an urgent safety matter." Mitchell looked up from his list with that patient but slightly annoyed smile. Event professionals develop to handle anxious guests or last-minute demands. "Of course, Ms. Torres." "Maya Torres. I'm a senior emergency coordinator with the American Red Cross, and I'm very concerned about the weather conditions that are developing." She showed him her phone, where the latest radar image displayed Helena as a massive spiral of clouds moving inexorably toward the Massachusetts coast. "This hurricane has changed course dramatically in the last few hours. It's heading directly for Cape Cod and will be here in less than 3 hours. Mitchell glanced briefly at the phone screen, but his expression remained skeptical and slightly condescending. He had dealt with nervous guests before, people who found reasons to worry, even at the best-planned events. "Ms. Torres, I truly appreciate your concern, but I can assure you we have professional meteorologists monitoring these situations very closely," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the sky, which still showed patches of blue between the growing clouds. "The last official forecasts we received this morning showed Hurricane Helena passing well offshore, at least 100 miles out to sea. Those forecasts have changed drastically," Maya insisted, trying to keep her voice calm but firm. "Weather systems can change direction quickly, especially when interacting with high-pressure fronts. Helena has turned nearly 90 degrees in the last 6 hours. Mitchell sighed with the forced patience of someone who had had this conversation many times before with overly cautious clients. "With all due respect, coordinating a wedding for 200 people requires literally months of detailed planning. We have vendor contracts, delivery schedules, staff teams, professional photographers who flew in from New York, specifically for this event. We can't just cancel or change everything based on a smartphone forecast." Maya felt the familiar frustration of not being taken seriously. the same frustration she had faced countless times in her career. When local authorities initially doubted her evacuation recommendation, it was a constant battle women in leadership positions faced, especially in male-dominated fields like emergency management. Mr. Mitchell, I am not basing this solely on an app. I have worked for the Red Cross for 12 years. I coordinated evacuations during Sandy, during Irene, during Matthew. I managed relief operations in 6 different states. I literally know how to recognize a dangerous weather situation when I see one. She tried to keep her voice professional, but allowed a hint of authority to come through. Look around. The wind has already shifted direction and is steadily increasing. The clouds on the horizon are moving at a speed that indicates high-pressure systems. We have a temporary structure set up in an exposed area with 200 people, including children and the elderly, and I've coordinated outdoor events for 15 years. Mitchell shot back, his patience clearly wearing thin and a touch of defensiveness creeping into his voice. Believe me, if there were any real danger, we would absolutely be the first to know. We have relationships with the National Weather Service, with local emergency authorities, with the Coast Guard. He gestured toward the celebration happening around them, where elegant guests chatted and laughed under the white pavilion, completely oblivious to the tense conversation taking place just a few feet away. Besides, look at these people. These are some of the most successful and well-connected professionals from Boston and New York. If there were a real threat, don't you think they would have received alerts through their own networks? Well-connected people die in natural disasters just like anyone else, Maya replied, her frustration finally coming through in her voice. Money and social status offer no protection against 100 mph winds and storm surge tides. Mitchell stared at her for a moment, his expression hardening. It was clear he interpreted her comment not only as a criticism of his professional competence, but also of the social world he served and depended on for his livelihood. Miss Torres, I understand you may have experience in your field, but this is my event, on my property, and I am responsible for these decisions. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a dinner for 200 people to oversee, photographers waiting for important sessions, and a very specific schedule to maintain. And what if I'm right? What if Helena arrives here in 2 hours with hurricane-force winds and storm surge? How are you going to explain to 200 families that you ignored a direct warning from an emergency professional because you didn't want to interrupt a schedule? For a moment, Maya saw uncertainty flash in Mitchell's eyes. But then he looked around at the elegant celebration, at the wealthy guests chatting cheerfully, at the expensive machinery of a perfectly orchestrated event, and his expression hardened again. If there are any changes in conditions that present real danger, the appropriate authorities will notify us through the proper official channels. Until then, this event will proceed as planned. As Mitchell walked away, clearly considering the conversation closed, Maya felt a mixture of anger, frustration, and growing despair. She looked around at the guests, all laughing and chatting animatedly under the pavilion, completely unaware of the potential danger approaching from the ocean. The elaborate bar was serving signature cocktails created specifically for the occasion, with names like Breeze of Love and Promise of the Ocean. Hired musicians played soft jazz that blended with the rising sound of the wind. Waiters in impeccable uniforms circulated with trays of gourmet that likely cost more per person than many families spend on food in an entire week. It was a world of privilege and beauty, but also of dangerous denial of reality. Ethan appeared at her side, holding 2 glasses of Dom champagne that probably cost more than they spent on a special night out. How did the conversation go? He didn't believe me. Said he has professional meteorologists and relationships with local authorities. Basically treated me like a hysterical guest trying to ruin the party. And Lucas, did you try talking to him? Maya looked across the elegant crowd to where her ex-husband was posing for elaborate photos with Olivia near the rocky cliffs. They were surrounded by smiling relatives and well-dressed friends, all participating in the creation of perfect day memories that had probably cost $100,000 to orchestrate. Lucas was in his element, the center of attention, clearly loving every moment of adulation and celebration. His laugh carried that performative quality Maya remembered from social events during their marriage, when he worked a room like a seasoned politician. What do you think he's going to say if I interrupt his photo session to talk about hurricanes? Maya asked, her voice carrying years of frustration about how Lucas reacted to anything that might interfere with his plans or his image. Ethan shook his head, perfectly understanding the dynamic. During the 2 years he had known Maya, he had heard enough stories about her marriage to fully understand how Lucas operated. He'd say, "You're being dramatic, that you've always been obsessed with disasters, that you're trying to sabotage his special day out of jealousy or resentment." Ethan said with uncomfortable precision, "Exactly. And then everyone here would see me exactly the way he's always painted me. The woman who can't relax, who sees danger everywhere, who can't just let people be happy." But as Maya spoke, she noticed conditions deteriorating, visibly, even in the few minutes since she had spoken with Mitchell. The wind had increased significantly, now strong enough to make the side curtains of the pavilion snap with growing force. Some of the flowers from the table arrangements had begun to break loose and fly across the covered space. More concerning, she could see whitecaps beginning to form on the ocean where the waters had previously been relatively calm. The waves were growing larger and more frequent, crashing against the rocks below with increasing force that created spray now reaching the lower areas of the property. "Ethan, look at the sea," she said, pointing discreetly toward the ocean. Ethan followed her gaze and immediately understood what she was seeing. As a military veteran and experienced paramedic, he had learned to read environmental signs that indicated dangerous changes in conditions. "It's getting rough very fast," he observed. "And look at those clouds. They're moving at a speed that is definitely not normal." Maya checked her phone again and felt her stomach sink further. Helena had intensified to Category 3 as it approached the coast. With sustained winds now estimated at 115 miles per hour, more alarming still, the storm was moving faster than previously forecast. "She'll be here in less than 2 hours, Maya said, showing the updated screen to Ethan. "And now she's a Category 3. They looked around at the 200 guests celebrating joyfully, completely unaware that one of the most powerful hurricanes of the season was heading directly toward them at increasing speed. "Maybe we should just leave," Ethan suggested quietly. "If you're right about this storm, we don't want to be trapped here. We could be back in Boston before it really gets bad." Maya considered the suggestion seriously. The rationale, self-preserving part of her, completely agreed they could leave now. Drive back to Boston before the roads became dangerous or impassable. They could be safe and dry in their Cambridge apartment when Helena finally hit. Watching the news from the comfort of their couch while the storm battered Cape Cod, it would be the smart choice. The safe choice, the choice any sensible person would make in a situation like this. But she looked again at the 200 guests around her, and saw much more than just an elegant party full of privileged people. She saw families with young children who could be lost or injured during an emergency evacuation. She saw elderly guests who would have difficulty moving quickly if conditions suddenly worsened. She saw people dressed in formal attire completely unsuited for surviving severe storms. She saw Lucas and Olivia, still posing for photographs, completely absorbed in their perfect celebration and completely ignorant of what was approaching on the horizon. "I can't," she said finally, her voice carrying all the conviction that had guided her entire career. "I can't just leave knowing what's coming. These people have no idea the danger they're facing." Ethan studied her face for a long moment, seeing the determination he had learned to recognize and admire. It was the same expression she wore when coordinating evacuations during emergencies, when lives depended on her decisions and she refused to give up until everyone was safe. "Then we stay," he said simply. "But we'll need a plan." Maya was already thinking ahead, her trained mind automatically shifting into the crisis management mode she had developed through years of experience in emergency situations. "First, we need to identify the safest structures on the property. That canvas pavilion definitely won't hold against hurricane winds." They began discreetly exploring the grounds, trying not to draw attention as they assessed shelter options. The main house was solid, 2-century-old colonial stone construction that had probably survived dozens of severe storms. There was also a stone barn on the highest point of the property, far from the cliffs where storm surge would be most dangerous, but moving to 100 people from an elegant reception to emergency shelters required not only identifying safe locations, but also convincing people in celebration mode that the danger was real and immediate. And with Lucas clearly determined to maintain his perfect day, and Mitchell equally determined not to let anything interfere with his carefully orchestrated event, Maya knew she would have to wait until conditions became so obviously dangerous that even the most stubborn skeptics could no longer deny them. At 6 o'clock, during the elaborate best man's toast, a carefully prepared speech about how Lucas had finally found his true soulmate, the pavilion's decorative lights began flickering intermittently. The electricity was becoming unstable, a clear sign the storm was rapidly approaching and beginning to impact local infrastructure. Maya checked her phone one last time and saw that Helena was now estimated to hit Cape Cod in less than 45 minutes. Sustained winds had risen to 120 miles per hour, officially making it a very strong Category 3 storm, almost a Category 4. "Ethan," she whispered urgently, "we need to act, now." But before she could take decisive action, nature made the decision for her. A deafening thunderclap exploded directly overhead, so loud and close that several people screamed and instinctively ducked. The sound was immediately followed by a lightning bolt that lit up the entire sky in blinding white, revealing massive, threatening clouds now covering the horizon completely. The rain, which had been only a few heavy drops, suddenly became a torrential downpour that penetrated the pavilion's covering in seconds. And then, as if someone had flipped a giant switch, the wind shifted from a strong but manageable gale to something entirely different, something primal and terrifying that seemed to come from all directions at once. The pavilion's side curtains began tearing apart with loud cracks like gunfire. Elaborate cocktail tables toppled, sending expensive crystal and floral arrangements flying through the air. The first genuine screams of alarm began rising from the elegant crowd as the reality of the situation finally broke through their collective denial. Maya Torres, the woman who had been invited to be humiliated in a display of social superiority, suddenly became the only person on site with the skills and experience to save 200 lives. As panic began spreading through the reception like wildfire, she took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and prepared to take control of a situation that was rapidly spinning beyond anyone's control. Hurricane Helena had arrived in Cape Cod, and the true test of character for everyone present, including herself, was only just beginning. Chaos erupted in the pavilion like a bomb detonating in slow motion. In a matter of seconds, the elegant wedding reception transformed into a scene of total panic straight out of a disaster movie. Winds over 90 miles per hour tore through the white canvas structure, ripping down decorative curtains that had cost thousands of dollars and sending fine china, crystal glasses, and expensive floral arrangements flying through the air like deadly projectiles. The noise was deafening, a constant roar that made it almost impossible to hear anything but screams. The wind was not just strong, it was violent, primal, a force of nature that reduced all human elegance and sophistication to insignificance in moments. Maya felt every survival and leadership instinct she had developed over 12 years of emergency work take over completely, while other guests screamed and ran aimlessly, stumbling over each other in high heels and expensive suits. She positioned herself at the center of the growing chaos and did the one thing she knew worked in crisis situations. She took control with absolute, unshakable authority. "Attention, everyone, listen to me now." Her voice cut through the storm's roar like an emergency siren, projected with all the force that years of coordinating evacuations and natural disasters had given her. "I am Maya Torres, Senior Emergency Coordinator for the American Red Cross. We need to evacuate this area immediately." For a moment that felt like an eternity, the panic paused as 200 people instinctively turned toward her. It was as if, in the midst of total chaos, they subconsciously recognized the voice of authority, someone who knew what to do when the world was falling apart around them. Maya saw Lucas in the crowd, still in his Hugo Boss tuxedo now stained with rain and mud, his face a mixture of shock, confusion, and what might have been relief that someone was taking charge. Olivia stood beside him, her French lace wedding dress already soaked and ruined, her eyes wide with absolute terror as she tried to process how her perfect day had turned into a nightmare in minutes. "The pavilion is not safe," Maya continued, her voice carrying the full authority of years of experience, saving lives in situations just like this. "This structure will collapse. We need to move to solid buildings now. Families with children and elderly, follow me to the main house. Everyone else, to the stone barn at the top of the hill." Even as she shouted instructions, part of her mind was making rapid calculations. Distances to safe shelters, building capacities, estimated time to move 200 people in conditions deteriorating by the second. James Mitchell, the event coordinator, appeared through the torrential rain, his face red not just from being soaked but from pure rage. His immaculate appearance was gone, his expensive suit was drenched, his perfectly styled hair plastered to his head, and his expression that of a man watching months of careful planning, and his professional reputation collapsed before his eyes. "Ms. Torres, you can't just take over my event," he shouted, struggling to be heard over the growing roar of the wind. "We have established protocols, we have insurance, we have legal procedures. You have no authority here." His words were dramatically cut short when a particularly violent gust of wind, later estimated at over 110 miles per hour, completely ripped away one of the pavilion's main support structures. The 8-meter metal pole crashed down with a deafening metallic clang, narrowly missing a table where a family with 3 small children had been sitting just moments earlier. The massive white canvas of the pavilion began collapsing in a sequence that seemed to happen in slow motion but in reality took only seconds. The heavy fabric fell onto tables, chairs, and people, creating a desperate tangle of screams, cries, and total panic. "Your protocols mean nothing if everyone dies," Maya shouted back, her professional patience finally exhausted in the face of Mitchell's dangerous obstinacy. Then, turning to the terrified crowd, struggling to free themselves from the pavilion wreckage, "Get out from under the canvas. Move in groups. Don't get separated." Ethan appeared beside her, as if by instinct, already helping a 70-year-old woman who had stumbled and fallen when the pavilion began to collapse. He lifted her carefully, but efficiently, quickly checking for injuries before guiding her toward the main house. "Maya, what else do you need?" he shouted, his military-trained voice cutting through the chaos. "Help me organize evacuation groups. We need to make sure no one is left behind." But as Maya tried to coordinate an orderly evacuation from what remained of the pavilion, she realized a much more immediate and terrifying problem: the water. The torrential rain had only been the beginning of the story. Now, looking toward the cliffs through the curtain of horizontal rain, she could see a solid wall of water approaching the shore, the storm surge she had predicted, but arriving much faster and much higher than even her most pessimistic estimates. "The water is rising," she shouted, pointing dramatically toward the ocean where waves over 20 feet high were beginning to crash over rocks that normally sat well above the high tide line. "Storm surge. We have maybe 5 minutes before the low areas are completely flooded." It was at that moment of mounting terror that she saw Olivia. The young bride had stumbled while trying to run, in her elaborate gown with its long train and 4-inch Louboutin heels, utterly unsuitable for anything other than posing gracefully for photographs. Now she lay near one of the overturned dining tables, clutching her right ankle and crying not only from physical pain, but from sheer terror and total disbelief that her perfect day had turned into this apocalyptic nightmare. Lucas was only a few meters away, but he seemed completely paralyzed by the situation. The man who had spent his entire life controlling circumstances through personal charm, social connections, and financial power was now facing a situation that none of those tools could solve. Nature didn't care about his Harvard law degree, his bank account, or his network of influential contacts. Maya didn't hesitate for a second, running through the wind that now reached nearly Category 3 hurricane force and rain falling so intensely it was almost impossible to see more than a few meters ahead. She reached Olivia and immediately began a basic medical assessment she had learned through years of working with first aid teams. "Olivia, can you hear me?" Maya shouted, kneeling in the mud that was quickly forming around them. "I need to check your ankle." I think it's broken," Olivia sobbed, her voice almost drowned out by the roar of the storm. "It hurts so much. I can't put weight on it. How did this happen? How did everything collapse so fast?" Maya quickly examined the injury with practiced hands, carefully palpating the ankle through the soaked fabric of the dress. It was definitely swollen and likely severely twisted, but her years of experience with emergency injuries made her suspect. It was more likely a severe sprain than a full fracture. "Olivia, listen to me very carefully," Maya said, forcing her voice to stay calm and authoritative even as water began pooling around her knees. "Your ankle is injured, but you're going to be fine if we can get you out of here. But we need to move now." She looked around quickly, making survival calculations that had become second nature after years of coordinating rescues in extreme conditions. They were in one of the lowest parts of the property, a natural depression that was rapidly becoming a temporary lagoon as rainwater and storm surge overflow began to accumulate. In minutes, maybe less, that area would be completely submerged under several feet of debris-laden salt water. "Lucas," she shouted at her ex-husband, who still stood just a few meters away like a statue, staring alternately at his injured new wife and the water advancing with terrifying speed. "I need your help now. Your wife is hurt and we're all going to die if we don't act." The military tone in her voice, honed from working with veterans like Ethan and emergency teams that operated with near-military discipline, finally broke through the shock that had paralyzed Lucas. He shook his head like a man waking from a nightmare and ran toward them, his Italian dress shoes slipping in the rising mud. What do I do?" he asked, his voice carrying a vulnerability Maya had never heard during all their years of marriage. Lucas Grant, the man who always had a plan, who always knew exactly what to say in any social or professional setting, was completely lost. "Help me lift her," Maya ordered. "We'll make an improvised stretcher." Ethan appeared as if summoned, carrying a tablecloth he had ripped from one of the overturned tables and 2 substantial pieces of wood that had broken off the pavilion structure. His military experience was showing he had automatically begun searching for materials that could be used for emergency transport. "We can use this," he shouted, already assembling a makeshift field stretcher he had learned to build during combat training in the army. Working with efficiency born of practice, Maya and Ethan managed to create a functional transport device while Lucas held Olivia, offering emotional comfort even if he couldn't contribute much technically. But as they worked, Maya was painfully aware that the water was rising around their ankles at an alarming speed. The storm surge was arriving faster than her most pessimistic projections, and they were quickly running out of time. "We need to move now," she shouted. "This area will be underwater in minutes." With Lucas carrying one side of the improvised stretcher and Ethan carrying the other, they began the desperate journey through terrain that was rapidly turning into a treacherous swamp. Olivia lay semi-conscious on the stretcher, alternating between sobs of pain and incoherent murmurs about how this couldn't be happening, how her perfect day had been destroyed. But as they struggled toward higher ground, Maya realized that evacuating Olivia was only the beginning of their problems. Looking around through the horizontal rain and winds that now clearly reached Category 3 hurricane strength, she could see that other guests were facing equally desperate situations. A family with 3 small children was struggling to move toward the main house, but the children were too terrified to cooperate and the parents were clearly overwhelmed. An elderly man of at least 80 had fallen and couldn't get up without assistance. 2 older women clung to each other near the wreckage of the bar, clearly lost and unsure where to go. "Guys, what tension." Maya is saving the bride who is supposed to be her rival, while Lucas finally realizes who the true heroine of the story is. Are you feeling this emotion? Leave a like if you're glued to the screen and comment. How do you think this story will end? Let's move on to the grand finale. "Ethan," Maya shouted as she helped carry Olivia across increasingly treacherous terrain. "Once we get Olivia to safety, we need to go back for the others. There are people who won't be able to evacuate on their own." "Understood," he replied, his voice carrying the military discipline that he knew would save lives in the coming hours. As they finally reached higher ground where the main stone house offered the first real promise of safety, Maya looked back one last time at the area where the reception had taken place. The elegant pavilion was gone, reduced to scraps of wet canvas and twisted metal. Tables that had cost hundreds of dollars each to decorate were scattered like broken toys. Floral arrangements crafted by Boston florists were being carried away by the rising water like worthless debris. All the elaborate beauty, all the carefully orchestrated elegance, all the expensive display of social success had been reduced to nothing in less than 15 minutes by nature's brute force. But most important, the 200 people who had come to celebrate a wedding were now fighting for survival in one of the most powerful storms Cape Cod had faced in decades. And Maya Torres, the woman who had been invited to be humiliated, had become the only person present with the skills, experience, and courage necessary to coordinate a rescue operation that would determine whether everyone made it out alive tonight. As water continued to rise and the wind intensified to levels that tested the limits of human endurance, she knew the coming hours would reveal the true character of every person present, including her own. Hurricane Helena had arrived with all its primal fury. Now it remained to be seen who had the inner strength to face the storm and emerge on the other side. The main house stood ahead of them, its 2-century-old stone walls offering the first real promise of safety they had seen since the storm hit. But Maya knew that getting Olivia to safety was only the first step in a night that would test every limit of endurance, courage, and humanity they possessed. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she couldn't help the bitter irony. Lucas had once said she loved disasters more than she loved him. Now, in a real disaster that threatened his new wife's life, he was relying completely on the skills he had spent years belittling. Sometimes, Maya thought, as she helped carry Olivia to safety, life has a very cruel and very precise sense of poetic justice. The main house of the Vineyard Bluffs Resort was a stone fortress built in 1847, and never had Maya been so grateful for 19th-century craftsmanship. The thick local fieldstone walls absorbed the impact of winds, now consistently exceeding 115 miles per hour, and the small, thick-paned windows withstood the projectiles the storm hurled at them in constant assaults. When they finally carried Olivia through the massive oak front door, Maya immediately began assessing the interior like an experienced emergency coordinator. The main hall was spacious enough to accommodate perhaps 40 people comfortably, with a solid staircase leading to the second floor and several adjacent rooms that could serve as additional space if needed. Most importantly, the construction was solid. These walls had survived 175 years of New England storms, including the Great Hurricane of 1938 that had devastated much of Cape Cod. If any structure on the property could withstand Helena, it would be this one. "Lucas, help me lay her on the couch," Maya instructed, indicating an antique leather sofa positioned away from the windows. "We need to elevate the ankle and check for other injuries." As they carefully transferred Olivia from the improvised stretcher to the couch, Maya noticed the young bride was going into shock, her skin pale and clammy, her breathing rapid and irregular, her body trembling uncontrollably, despite being relatively warm inside the house. "Olivia, you're safe now," Maya said with the soothing voice she had perfected over years of consoling disaster victims. "You're in a solid house, away from the storm. Your ankle will heal. You're going to be fine." "My dress," Olivia murmured, looking down at the French lace now stained with mud, salt water, and debris. "It cost $8,000. It was my grandmother's. She wore it at her wedding in 1952. Maya felt a genuine pang of sympathy for the young woman. In the midst of a life-or-death situation, Olivia was still processing the loss of objects that represented dreams and family memories. It was a completely human and understandable reaction, even if not the most practical priority at the moment. "Dresses can be cleaned or replaced," Maya said gently. "What matters is that you're alive and safe. Everything else can be fixed." But as she spoke comforting words to Olivia, part of Maya's mind focused on the sounds outside. The roar of the wind had grown even more intense, a primal, terrifying noise that seemed to come from the earth itself. Occasionally, she heard the crash of something heavy, likely trees or parts of buildings slamming against the exterior walls. More concerning, she could hear human screams mixed with the storm's noise. Others were still out there, still struggling to find safety in conditions that were rapidly becoming unsurvivable outdoors. "Ethan," she said, glancing at her partner, who was checking the windows to ensure they were securely latched. "How many people do you think made it here? Maybe 20, 25? He replied, making a quick count of those gathered in the main hall. "Mostly families with small kids and some older folks." Maya did the math quickly. If only 25 had made it to the main house, that meant more than 170 guests were still somewhere outside, some likely in the stone barn she had identified as the other safe shelter, but others possibly still exposed to the elements or trapped in structures that couldn't withstand a Category 3 hurricane. "We need to try another rescue," she said, already moving toward the door. "Too many people are still out there." "Maya, no." Lucas appeared at her side, gripping her arm. It was the first time she had seen him take decisive initiative since the storm began. "You've already done more than anyone could expect. You can't go out again in these conditions." It was strange to hear genuine concern in Lucas's voice, not the performative worry he sometimes displayed in social situations, but real fear that something might happen to her. Maya looked into his eyes and saw something she hadn't seen during the last years of their marriage. Genuine respect for who she was and what she did. "Lucas," she said gently, "this is what I do. It's who I am. For 12 years, I've gone out into storms like this to bring people home safely, but you don't have to do it alone this time," Ethan said, appearing with a raincoat he had found in a closet. "If you're going, I'm going with you." "Me too," said a voice behind them. Maya turned and was surprised to see James Mitchell, the event coordinator, who had made it into the house sometime in the last few minutes. His appearance was completely transformed. The impeccably dressed man was gone, replaced by someone soaked, muddy, and clearly humbled by circumstances. "Mr. Mitchell, you were right," he said simply, "about everything. And I was wrong. Wrong about the storm, wrong about ignoring your warnings, wrong about putting appearances above safety." He paused, looking around at the people sheltered in the house. "You saved these lives, and if there are more people out there who need help, then I need to help bring them home." Maya studied his face for a moment and saw genuine sincerity where before there had been only defensive arrogance. Crises have a way of revealing people's true character, both the best and the worst. "All right," she said, accepting his offer, "but we do this my way. We follow my lead. We follow safety protocols, and if I say we turn back immediately. We can't help anyone if we become victims too." Before leaving, Maya knelt beside the couch where Olivia was resting. The young bride had stopped trembling, and her color was slowly returning signs. The initial shock was passing. "Olivia, I'm going out to try to help others who may still be trapped outside. Lucas will stay here with you." "Why are you doing this?" Olivia asked, her voice small but genuinely curious. "Why are you helping me? I know Lucas invited you to." To be cruel, everyone knew. Maya considered the question honestly. Why was she doing this? Why was she risking her own safety to save people who had been complicit, or at least passive spectators, in Lucas's attempt to publicly humiliate her? "Because it's the right thing to do," she finally said. "And because when storms come, real storms or metaphorical ones, the only things that matter are our shared humanity and our willingness to care for each other." She paused, looking out the window at the storm's continuing fury. "Besides, you didn't choose how you were invited to this wedding. You just wanted a beautiful day to start your new life. Everyone deserves that." Olivia nodded, tears forming in her eyes, not from physical pain this time, but from something deeper. "Thank you," she whispered, "and I'm sorry. For the way things were planned, I didn't know." "You don't need to apologize for anything," Maya said firmly. "Just stay safe and take care of that ankle." As Maya, Ethan, and Mitchell prepared to head out into the storm again, Lucas approached his ex-wife one last time. "Maya, there are things I need to say to you when this is over. Things about our marriage, about how I treated you, about who you really are versus who I tried to make you be." "Lucas, no, let me say this. I spent 3 years convincing myself our divorce was your fault. That you were obsessive, dramatic, incapable of relaxing or being a normal wife. But watching you today, seeing how you took control when everything collapsed, realizing you literally saved our lives." He shook his head, clearly struggling with emotions he wasn't used to processing. "You've always been the strongest person I've ever known, and instead of admiring that, I felt threatened by it. Instead of supporting your career, I tried to minimize it. Instead of celebrating your ability to save lives, I made jokes about your disaster obsession." "Lucas, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. Because today I learned that your disaster obsession is exactly what saved our lives, and Olivia's life, and dozens of others." He looked toward the door where the wind roared like a runaway freight train. "And now you're going out again, in these conditions, to save strangers who treated you poorly. Because that's who you are. And I was too much of a fool to value it when I had the chance." Maya touched his arm gently. "Lucas, we all grow. We all learn. What matters is you're here now, taking care of Olivia, helping these people. That counts. Just come back safe, okay? The world needs people like you." The second rescue mission was even more dangerous than the first. Conditions had deteriorated dramatically. The wind now consistently exceeded 120 miles per hour. Horizontal rain made it nearly impossible to see beyond a few feet, and water was pooling in low areas at an alarming rate. But it was also more organized. Maya had learned from the first attempt, and now they moved as a team with clear purpose and constant communication. Mitchell, despite his lack of emergency experience, followed instructions precisely and demonstrated a courage Maya hadn't expected from him. They found the family with 3 children. First, the parents had managed to get the kids into an equipment shed that offered partial protection, but the structure was clearly not going to withstand hurricane-force winds much longer. The children were terrified but physically unharmed, and the whole family wept with relief when Maya and her team appeared. The elderly man who had fallen was in more precarious condition. He had managed to crawl under a fallen tree that offered some shelter from the wind, but he was suffering from early hypothermia and possible concussion. It took 3 people to move him to safety, and Maya knew they had arrived just in time, by a matter of minutes. The two older women clinging to each other near the wreckage of the bar presented the most complex challenge. One of them, who looked about 70 years old, was having what appeared to be a severe panic attack, hyperventilating and unable to move. The other was trying to calm her, but was clearly overwhelmed by the situation. "Ma'am, I'm Maya. I work in emergencies," Maya shouted over the roar of the storm, kneeling beside the panicked woman. "You're safe now. We're going to get you out of here, but I need you to breathe with me. Okay, inhale, hold, exhale." It took several precious minutes, but Maya managed to calm the woman enough for them to move her. Breathing techniques she had learned working with trauma victims translated perfectly to panic situations induced by natural disasters. When they finally managed to bring all the survivors back to the main house, more than 3 hours had passed since the storm had begun. Maya was exhausted, soaked, covered in mud and debris, and running on pure adrenaline and determination. But as she counted the people now sheltered in the main house 43, including those they had rescued, she knew there was still much work to be done. There were still more than 100 people somewhere, hopefully in the stone barn or other safe shelters. "Mitchell," she said, accepting a towel someone offered. "Do you have any way to establish communication with the barn? Radio? Intercom? Anything?" "We have an intercom system, but I don't know if it's still working with the unstable power." They managed to establish a crackling connection with the barn, and Maya felt enormous relief upon hearing that approximately 120 people had managed to get there safely. The barn was even more solid than the main house built to store heavy equipment. It had been built to last and was holding up well against the storm. "Anyone there injured?" Maya shouted through the static-filled intercom. "Some cuts and bruises. A possible arm fracture, but nothing life-threatening," came the reply. "We're okay here. What about you?" "Same situation. We'll keep in touch every hour to check status." As the night wore on, Maya naturally found herself assuming the role of emergency coordinator for the entire operation. She organized shifts of people to monitor communications, established protocols to conserve food and water supplies, and created a first aid system using basic medical supplies that Mitchell had managed to find in the resort offices. Most importantly, she kept morale high. During years of working in emergency shelters, she had learned that people's mindset during prolonged crises could be just as important as their physical safety. She told stories about other storms she had weathered, led group discussions about what they would do when the storm passed, and generally kept everyone focused on the future instead of dwelling on the terror of their current situation. Lucas watched all of this with an expression Maya couldn't entirely decipher. She occasionally caught him staring at her with what looked like wonderment, as if he were seeing a completely new person or perhaps realizing for the first time who she had always been. Around midnight, something changed in the quality of the noise outside. The constant roar of the wind diminished slightly, and the torrential rain began to grow more intermittent. "We're entering the eye of the storm," Maya announced to the gathered group. "That means we'll have maybe an hour of relatively calm conditions before the other side of the hurricane arrives. But do not go out. The other side can be just as dangerous as the first." During that strange, surreal hour of relative calm, Maya finally had a moment to process everything that had happened. She was sitting at a window, looking out at the moonlit devastation that had been just hours earlier, an elegant wedding. Ethan joined her, offering a cup of coffee someone had managed to make on an emergency generator. "Penny for your thoughts?" "Just processing," she said. "This morning I was nervous about seeing Lucas get married. Now I've saved his new wife's life and coordinated a rescue operation for 200 people." "You didn't just save Olivia's life," Ethan said gently. "You saved everyone's life here. If you hadn't taken control when the pavilion started to collapse, if you hadn't forced people to evacuate while it was still possible, a lot of people wouldn't have survived tonight." Maya nodded, but there was something else in her expression, a subtle sadness Ethan knew well enough to recognize. "What else is bothering you?" she sighed, looking out the window at where the floodwaters reflected the moon, in a landscape that looked alien and ravaged. "I'm thinking about all the times during my marriage when Lucas made me feel as if my career was an inconvenient hobby, as if my emergency training was just a strange obsession. That made me less feminine, less desirable as a wife." She paused, taking a sip of the hot coffee. "And today, that same training saved his life. It saved the life of the woman who replaced me. It saved the lives of dozens of people who once judged me for not fitting the mold they thought a wife should fill." "It's ironic," Ethan agreed, "but it's also validation. Proof that you always knew who you were, even when others tried to convince you otherwise." Maya smiled for the first time in hours, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "You know what's funny? For years I wondered if Lucas was right, if maybe I really was too obsessed with work, too dramatic about dangers, unable to relax and be a normal wife. Today proved there was nothing wrong with me. I was exactly who I needed to be." Across the room, Lucas was sitting beside Olivia on the sofa, holding her hand while she dozed fitfully. But Maya could feel him occasionally looking in her direction, and when their eyes met, she saw something she had never seen before. True recognition of her value. Around 2 in the morning, the wind began to pick up again as the other side of the hurricane approached. This time, however, the group was prepared. They knew what to expect. They had established routines, and, more importantly, They had confidence in Maya's leadership. The second half of the storm was less intense than the first, but it lasted longer. Sustained winds of about 100 miles per hour continued for another 3 hours, accompanied by intermittent but heavy rain and occasional gusts that tested the limits of the house's structural resilience. Maya kept everyone busy and focused during the long hours. She organized small group discussions about recovery plans, led meditation exercises she had learned for managing stress in prolonged emergency situations, and even got people sharing stories about their own experiences overcoming adversity. It was exactly the kind of community-focused leadership she had developed over years working in disaster relief, not just keeping people physically safe, but maintaining their psychological well-being during collective trauma. As dawn approached and the noise of the storm finally began to subside consistently, Maya knew they were finally approaching the end of their ordeal. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to the group at 5 in the morning, "I believe Helena is finally moving past us, but we need to remain inside until it's completely safe. There will be debris everywhere, downed power lines, flooding in low-lying areas. No one leaves until rescue teams arrive or until I personally determine it's safe." The first light of dawn revealed the full scope of the devastation Helena had wrought in Cape Cod. Through the windows of the main house, Maya could see a transformed landscape: centuries-old trees uprooted, buildings destroyed or severely damaged, vehicles overturned or swept away by the flooding. The elegant wedding venue that had existed just 12 hours earlier had been completely erased. There was no trace of the white pavilion, the elaborate floral arrangements, the carefully arranged seating. Nature had reclaimed the space with the same indifferent force that had created the beautiful ocean. Views that initially attracted people to build here. But most importantly, people had survived. As rescue teams began arriving around 8 in the morning, Coast Guard helicopters, National Guard vehicles, local emergency responders, Maya felt a sense of professional satisfaction that went deeper than personal vindication. She had done what she had trained her entire career to do. She had saved lives when it mattered most. The first responder to reach the main house was Captain Maria Santos of the Massachusetts National Guard, a woman Maya knew from previous disaster response operations. "Maya, thank God you were here," Captain Santos said as she assessed the group of survivors. "We've been trying to reach this area for hours, but the roads were completely impassable until just now." "How many casualties overall?" Maya asked, immediately switching into professional mode. "Amazingly few, considering the intensity of the storm. Some injuries, a lot of property damage, but apparently no fatalities in this area. And from what we're hearing, this house and the barn were the only two structures on the property that provided real safety." Captain Santos looked around at the group of well-dressed wedding guests who now looked like survivors of a major disaster, who coordinated the evacuation, because whoever did that saved many lives tonight. Every eye in the room turned to Maya, and she felt a moment of awkward recognition that was completely different from the social awkwardness she had felt upon arriving at the wedding. This was respect, gratitude, acknowledgement of competence earned through action when it mattered most. Maya Torres, Red Cross, she identified herself simply. "Of course," Captain Santos smiled. "Should have known. Your reputation precedes you, Torres. We've heard about your work during Sandy, during the Massachusetts floods last year. You always show up when things get bad." As evacuation procedures began and people started being transported to temporary shelters and medical facilities for checkups, Maya found herself in a series of conversations that felt like closure on many different levels. Mitchell approached her first, carrying himself with less of the arrogance that had characterized him earlier. "Ms. Torres, I owe you an apology that goes far beyond what happened today," he said formally. "You tried to warn me about the danger, and I dismissed you because I thought I knew better. Because I was more concerned with appearances and liability than with people's safety." He paused, looking around at the survivors who were being safely evacuated. "I've worked in event coordination for 15 years, and I thought that gave me expertise in all aspects of managing large gatherings. Today I learned that there are some situations where no amount of social connections or business experience substitutes for real training and emergency response." Maya accepted his apology graciously, because she had learned during years of disaster work that people often react defensively when first confronted with situations beyond their control. What mattered was whether they learned from the experience. "Mr. Mitchell, you redeemed yourself when you volunteered to help with rescue operations. That took courage, and it made a real difference." Next came a conversation she had been both anticipating and dreading. A final talk with Lucas. He approached her while she was organizing her few personal belongings that had survived the night, preparing to leave with the evacuation teams. "Maya," he started, then stopped, clearly struggling with how to express everything he was feeling. "It's okay, Lucas," she said gently. "You don't have to say anything. We both learned things about ourselves tonight. No, I do need to say this, because I spent 3 years convincing myself that our divorce was your fault. That you were too intense, too focused on your career, incapable of being a good wife because you couldn't just relax and enjoy life." He gestured around at the remnants of what had been intended as his perfect wedding celebration. Today I learned that your intensity saved lives. Your obsession with emergency preparedness literally saved my wife's life. And all those times you tried to tell me about the importance of your work, all those times I rolled my eyes when you talked about disaster response. You were trying to share who you really were, and I was too selfish to listen. Maya felt a complex mix of emotions: vindication, sadness for lost time, and genuine hope that Lucas had learned something valuable about himself and about relationships. Lucas, we were young when we got married. We both had growing to do. The important thing is that you're here now, supporting Olivia, and you showed real character when you helped during the evacuation. Can I ask you something? He said. Do you think, if I had been different during our marriage, if I had supported your career instead of resenting it, do you think we could have made it work? Maya considered the question honestly, because Lucas deserved an honest answer. I think we became different people during our marriage, she said finally. You needed someone who fit into your vision of what a wife should be, and I needed someone who celebrated who I actually was. Those aren't necessarily incompatible things, but at the time, we couldn't find a way to make them work together. She smiled, and it was genuinely warm. But you know what? I'm genuinely happy that you found Olivia. She loves you for who you are, not for who she thinks you should become. And from what I saw tonight, you love her enough to grow as a person. That's what good marriages are built on. Finally, there was Olivia herself. A young woman who had started the day expecting the most perfect wedding of her dreams, and instead had experienced a life-threatening natural disaster that stripped away every superficial element of her celebration. She was being helped into an ambulance for a more thorough medical evaluation. When she asked to speak with Maya privately, I wanted to thank you, she said, her voice still weak but sincere. Not just for saving my life tonight, though obviously that means everything to me. She paused, adjusting the emergency blanket that had been draped over her shoulders. I wanted to thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. I grew up thinking that being a good wife meant being decorative and supportive and never making waves. Tonight I watched you take charge of a terrifying situation and literally save dozens of lives through competence and courage and sheer force of will. Olivia's eyes were bright with tears, but they were tears of recognition rather than sadness. I don't know if I'll ever be as strong as you are, but I want to try. I want to become someone who could handle a crisis like you did tonight. Someone who has skills and knowledge that could actually help people when they need it. Olivia, Maya said, genuinely moved by the young woman's honesty. Strength isn't something you either have or don't have. It's something you develop by choosing to act when action is needed, even when you're scared. Tonight you showed real strength by staying calm when you were injured and helping keep other people calm too. Really, really. And if you want to develop more skills that could help people in emergencies, there are volunteer programs through the Red Cross, community emergency response teams, first aid certification courses. There are lots of ways to become someone who can make a difference when it matters. As Maya finally prepared to leave in one of the evacuation vehicles, she took one last look at the coastal property that had been transformed overnight from a site of elegant celebration to a landscape of survival and recovery. The devastation was extensive, but she knew Cape Cod communities were resilient. People would clean up, rebuild, and eventually this would become just another story about a time when nature reminded humans of their place in the larger scheme of things. But for her personally, this had been about much more than surviving a natural disaster. It had been about vindication of choices she had made, validation of a career path that had sometimes cost her personally, and proof that she had been right to trust her instincts about who she was and what she was meant to do with her life. As the National Guard truck drove away from the Vineyard Bluffs resort, Maya felt a sense of completion that went beyond professional satisfaction. She had come to Cape Cod as a woman who had been invited to be humiliated at her ex-husband's wedding. She was leaving as a person who had saved lives, earned genuine respect, and proven to herself and everyone else that she was exactly who she had always known herself to be: strong, competent, and absolutely essential when the chips were down. 3 weeks after Hurricane Helena, Maya was in her Red Cross office in Boston, finalizing the official reports on the rescue operation in Cape Cod, when her phone rang. The name on the screen surprised her. It was Olivia. Maya, it's Olivia. I hope you don't mind my calling. I got your number from Lucas. Of course, Olivia, how are you? How's the ankle? The ankle is fine, thank you. The doctors said it will heal completely, with no permanent after effects. Olivia's voice sounded different, more mature, more focused than Maya remembered from the night of the storm. Actually, I'm calling because I wanted to tell you some things that have happened since that night. Maya leaned back in her chair, genuinely curious. In the 3 weeks since Helena, she had occasionally thought about the people she had helped rescue, wondering how they were processing the experience and whether it had prompted lasting changes in their lives. First, Olivia continued, I want you to know that you inspired me to make real changes in my life. Remember when you mentioned volunteer programs and emergency training? Well, I enrolled in the Red Cross First Aid Certification course. I start next week. Maya smiled, genuinely impressed. Many people make emotional statements about life changes during crises, but few follow through once normal life returns. That's wonderful, Olivia. You'll find it incredibly empowering to have those skills. I'm already discovering that just from the preparatory training, but there's more. Lucas and I decided to cancel our honeymoon at the resort in Bora Bora, and instead we're going to volunteer on a reconstruction effort here in Cape Cod. We want to help families who lost their homes during Helena. Maya stopped typing, genuinely surprised. The idea of Lucas Grantha, man who had once complained that she spent too much time helping strangers voluntarily giving up an expensive honeymoon to do manual reconstruction work, was almost incomprehensible. Wow. How does Lucas feel about that decision? Actually, it was his idea, Olivia said, and Maya could hear the smile in her voice. He said he spent 3 years convincing himself that your dedication to helping people was a character flaw, when in fact it was the most admirable thing about you. He said he wants to try to understand why this work is so important, and that maybe it's time for him to contribute to something bigger than his own life. There was a pause. Then Olivia continued more seriously. Maya, that night changed him in ways I didn't expect. Not just about you, but about himself. He realized he spent his whole life avoiding situations where he might fail or seem incompetent, and that made him smaller as a person, less courageous, less useful when it really mattered. Maya felt a complex mix of emotions. There was satisfaction in knowing Lucas finally understood the value of the work she did, but also a genuine sadness about the time lost and the relationship that might have been different if they had reached that understanding years earlier. I'm glad you two found a way to grow together through this experience, she said sincerely, and I'm impressed that you're channeling it into action to help others. There's one more thing, Olivia said, her voice growing more formal. Lucas wanted to ask you this personally, but he's still very embarrassed about how he treated you during your marriage. He wanted to know if you would consider letting us do something to honor you, maybe a donation to the Red Cross in your name, or sponsoring an emergency training program, something that acknowledges what you did for us and for everyone else that night. Maya considered the offer. Part of her appreciated the gesture, but there was something more important than money or public recognition. Olivia, if you really want to honor me, keep doing exactly what you're doing. Learn skills that can help people in crises. Use your resources and connections to make a difference in your communities. Become the kind of people who run toward problems instead of away from them. Are you sure? Because Lucas feels he owes you much more than that. Lucas doesn't owe me anything. That night, we all did what was necessary to survive and help each other. That's simply being human. After she hung up, Maya found herself thinking about how crises have a way of revealing who people really aren't sometimes, of catalyzing who they can become. She had always believed her emergency work was about saving lives in the moment, but maybe it was also about planting seeds that could grow into lasting positive change. Her phone rang again, this time showing a number she didn't recognize. Maya Torres. Ms. Torres, it's James Mitchell from the Vineyard Bluffs Resort. I hope you remember me, as if she could forget. Of course, Mr. Mitchell. How is the reconstruction? That's actually why I'm calling. The storm destroyed about 80% of our property, and we're rebuilding from scratch. And I wanted to offer you a position as our new Director of Safety and Emergency Preparedness. Maya was genuinely surprised. Mr. Mitchell, I appreciate the offer, but I don't have hospitality experience. You have something more important than hospitality experience. You have expertise in keeping people safe when everything goes wrong. And after what happened during Helena, I realized no business that hosts large groups of people should operate without someone with your kind of training on staff. He paused. Moreover, we want to make the new Vineyard Bluffs a model for emergency preparedness in the hospitality industry. We want to show it's possible to create elegant, luxurious experiences that are also safe and responsible. And we want you to lead that effort. The offer was tempting in many ways, a chance to apply her expertise in a different context, likely with a salary significantly better than what she earned at the Red Cross. But it also represented a fundamental change in the direction of her career. May I think about it? Of course, and Maya. Even if you decide not to take the position, I want you to know you have a standing invitation to any event we organize in the future, not as a guest, but as a consulting safety expert. All expenses paid and a generous fee for your services. Why would you do that? Because I learned that arrogance kills people, and humility saves them. You tried to warn me about the danger, and I ignored you because I thought I knew better. I never want to make that mistake again. That night, Maya talked with Ethan about the offer as they prepared dinner in their apartment. He listened attentively as she explained the position's details and the implications for her career. What is your gut telling you? He asked, slicing vegetables with the precision he had learned during military medical training. Honestly, I'm torn. It would be an incredible opportunity to influence emergency preparedness on a larger scale. If we can make Vineyard Bluffs a model, other resorts and event venues could follow suit. We could save many lives by setting new industry standards. But it would also mean leaving the hands-on disaster relief work I love. It would mean trading field rescue operations for board meetings and corporate consulting. I'm not sure I'm ready for that. Ethan stopped cutting and looked at her. Maya, in the 2 years I've known you, I've watched you make dozens of hard decisions under pressure. You always trust your instincts, and they've never let you down. If you don't feel right about this change, it's probably because it's not the right time. He stepped closer and took her hands. Besides, You just proved in a very dramatic way that you're exactly where you should be. Doing exactly what you should be doing. Why change something that's working perfectly? Maya smiled, feeling the tension leave her shoulders. Ethan was right. She had spent years learning to trust her instincts, and they were telling her she wasn't ready to leave fieldwork yet. You know what's funny? She said. 3 weeks ago, I was nervous about going to a wedding where I might be humiliated. Now I'm turning down job offers that would pay twice my current salary. It's not funny, Ethan said seriously. It's growth. It's confidence. It's knowing who you are and refusing to compromise just for money or status. The following week, Maya called James Mitchell and politely declined his offer, explaining that there was still much work to be done in the disaster relief field. She suggested he hire someone with experience in both emergencies and hospitality, and offered to help train the new person. Mitchell was disappointed but understanding, and he followed her suggestion to find a hybrid candidate. More importantly, he maintained his invitation for her to consult at future events, establishing a precedent that other hospitality venues began to follow. 2 months after Hurricane Helena, Maya received a call that would change her perspective on the lasting impact of that night. Maya, it's Captain Maria Santos from the National Guard. Maria, how are you? I'm well, thank you, but I'm calling with a proposal I think you'll find interesting. The state of Massachusetts wants to create a new emergency response training program for hospitality professionals, event organizers, and others who regularly manage large groups of people. Maya felt a chill of excitement. Go on. They want you to lead the curriculum development and train the instructors. It would be a part-time position that would allow you to continue your fieldwork with the Red Cross, but also influence emergency preparedness on a much larger scale. That sounds perfect. When can I start? There's a planning meeting next week in Boston. And Maya, the governor specifically mentioned what you did during Helena as the inspiration for this program. Your action that night is literally changing state public policy. After she hung up, Maya sat for a long moment, processing how a simple decision to attend her ex-husband's wedding had evolved into an opportunity to influence emergency preparedness across an entire state. Sometimes, she thought, life has a way of taking you exactly where you need to be, even when the path seems unlikely or uncomfortable. That evening, she and Ethan went out to dinner at a small Italian trattoria in the North End to celebrate the new opportunity. As they toasted with red wine, Maya reflected on how her life had changed since that August morning when she received a creamy envelope with an invitation designed to humiliate her. You know what's ironic, she said, swirling the wine in her glass. Lucas invited me to that wedding hoping to prove he had won our divorce, that he had found someone better, built a more elegant life, left behind the troublesome ex-wife who cared more about disasters than appearances, and instead, he ended up creating the situation where I could definitively prove that my priorities were right from the beginning, that the skills he always criticized are exactly the skills that saved his life and his new wife's life. Ethan raised his glass. 2 unexpected decisions that lead to perfect outcomes, and 2 storms that reveal who we really are. Maya added, clinking her glass against his. 6 months later, Maya stood at a podium in the State House in Boston, receiving a commendation from the governor for her actions during Hurricane Helena and her subsequent work developing emergency training programs for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. In the audience, she saw familiar faces. Ethan in the front row, smiling proudly. Captain Santos and several others she had worked with in emergency operations over the years. And, to her surprise, Lucas and Olivia Grant. After the ceremony, Lucas approached her with an expression she had never seen during all the years they were married. Pure, uncomplicated respect. Maya, I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry. For all the years I tried to make you feel there was something wrong with you for caring about your work. For every time I suggested you should relax or focus on more important things. For inviting you to my wedding for petty reasons that now completely shame me. Lucas, no. Let me finish. You dedicated your life to saving people, and I tried to make you feel bad about it because I felt threatened by your strength and purpose. But that night in Cape Cod, I finally understood that you weren't obsessive or dramatic. You were prepared. You were competent. You were exactly who the world needs when everything goes wrong. He paused, looking around at the elegant reception taking place in the State House. And now, watching you receive recognition you should have gotten years ago. Watching you use that terrible experience to create programs that will save even more lives in the future. I feel honored to have been married to you, even if I wasn't smart enough to appreciate who you were at the time. Maya felt tears forming in her eyes, not of sadness, but of a kind of closure she hadn't known she needed. Thank you for saying that, Lucas, and thank you for growing as a person. Olivia told me about the volunteer work you're doing. I'm proud of you both. We learn from the best, Olivia said, appearing at Lucas's side with a genuine smile. She was wearing a professional blazer and looked more confident, more centered than Maya remembered. By the way, I finished my first aid certification last week, and I signed up for advanced emergency response training. That's wonderful, Olivia. It's because of you. You showed me that real strength isn't about being perfect or elegant. It's about having skills that can help people when they need it most. As Maya drove home that night with Ethan, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a cruel invitation to a wedding she had almost skipped. "Do you ever wonder how it would have been different if you had decided not to go to the wedding?" Ethan asked. Maya considered the question. Sometimes, Lucas and Olivia would still have gotten married. Helena would still have hit Cape Cod, but without someone with emergency training present when the storm arrived. She didn't finish the sentence, but they both knew what she was implying. Without experienced coordination of the evacuation, without someone who understood how to read signs of dangerous weather, without calm leadership during the initial panic, many of the 200 people present that night might not have survived. "You know what I think?" Ethan said. "I think you were exactly where you needed to be, exactly when you needed to be there. Not because of Lucas or proving some point about your divorce, but because the universe sometimes places the right people in the right place at the right time." Maya smiled, thinking of all the times in her career when she had arrived at emergency situations at the exact moment her expertise was most needed. Maybe you're right. Maybe the whole situation, the invitation, my decision to go, even Helena's change of course timing was one of those strange convergences that happen when the universe needs something specific to occur. And what did the universe need to happen? For 200 people to survive a Category 3 storm? For Lucas to finally understand the real value of the work I do? For Olivia to discover her own inner strength? And maybe, for me to finally stop questioning whether I chose the right path in life. She paused, looking out the car windows at Boston's lights, spreading out before them. For years, a small part of me wondered if Lucas was right, if I really was too obsessive about work, if I was missing other important things in life by focusing so much on emergencies. But that night proved definitively that there's nothing more important than being able to help people when they need it most. A year later, Maya was coordinating a relief operation after a tornado had struck a small town in western Massachusetts, when she received an unexpected call. "Maya, it's Olivia Grant. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "It's never an interruption, Olivia. How are you?" "Actually, I'm calling because I have a proposal for you. Do you remember how you told me that if I really wanted to honor you, I should learn skills that could help people in crises?" "Of course, well, I just received my certification as an emergency medical technician, and there's an open position on the county's emergency response team here in Cape Cod. They're looking for someone with my level of training, and, well, I'd like to know if you would give me a recommendation." Maya stopped what she was doing, genuinely moved. The young woman she had known as a social media influencer primarily, concerned with appearances, had transformed into someone willing to dedicate her professional life to saving others. "Olivia, it would be an honor to write that recommendation. But may I ask what motivated such a dramatic career change?" "Honestly, that night during Helena changed my perspective on what really matters in life. I spent 27 years focusing on being beautiful, being admired, creating a life that looked perfect from the outside. But when the storm hit, none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was whether people had the skills needed to help each other survive." Olivia paused. "You saved my life that night, but more importantly, you showed me what kind of person I wanted to become. Someone useful, someone competent, someone who runs toward danger instead of away from it." "And how does Lucas feel about this change?" "He's incredibly proud. In fact, he's considering a career change of his own. He's thinking about leaving the corporate law firm to do public interest law, focusing on disaster victims' rights and emergency preparedness policy." Maya shook her head, amazed at how a terrible night had catalyzed such deep, positive changes in people she had known for years without seeing that potential. "Olivia, not only will I write your recommendation, but I'll also call the program director there in Cape Cod personally. They'd be lucky to have you on the team. Thank you, Maya, for everything. For saving my life, for inspiring me to change it, and for continuing to be an example of what it means to dedicate yourself to something bigger than yourself." After she hung up, Maya sat for a moment in the makeshift command van she had set up to coordinate the tornado relief efforts, reflecting on how a seemingly simple decision to accept a wedding invitation had created ripples that continued spreading more than a year later. Her assistant, Jennifer, appeared at the van's door with a status report. "Maya, we finished the search in Sector 3. No additional injured, but we found 3 more families who will need temporary shelter." "Thanks, Jen. Can you coordinate with the shelter team about additional space at the school shelter?" "Already did. We also have a local TV reporter requesting an interview about the relief operation." Maya sighed. She had never been comfortable with media attention, preferring to focus on the work rather than publicity. But she had learned that sometimes interviews were important to raise public awareness about emergency preparedness. "All right, but keep it short. We still have a lot of work to do before dark." The interview was standard questions about the extent of the damage, how many people were affected, how long it would take to restore basic services. But then the reporter asked a question that surprised her. "Ms. Torres, we understand you were recently honored by the state for your work during Hurricane Helena in Cape Cod. How has that experience influenced your approach to disaster relief work?" Maya considered the question, thinking about all the ways that night had changed not only her own perspective, but apparently inspired others to rethink their own lives and careers. I think Helena taught me that we never know when our skills and training will be needed, she said. We sometimes think of emergency response as something that happens only in official disaster situations. But the truth is, emergencies can happen anywhere, anytime: an elegant wedding, at a birthday party, at a business meeting. And what does that mean for ordinary people who might be watching? It means that all of us have a responsibility to be prepared to help our neighbors when they need it. That can mean learning basic first aid, knowing how to perform CPR, understanding basic emergency evacuation, or simply being willing to stay calm and help others when chaotic situations develop. Maya looked directly into the camera. You never know when you might be the only person in a situation with the knowledge needed to save lives. And if that moment comes, you want to be ready. 2 years after Hurricane Helena, Maya received an invitation that made her smile for the first time in days. It had been a particularly difficult week. She had coordinated relief after a flood that left 4 people dead and hundreds displaced, and she was emotionally exhausted. The envelope was elegant, cream-colored with gold calligraphy that immediately reminded her of another invitation she had received years earlier. But this time, when she opened it, she found something completely different. It was an invitation to the opening of the Maya Torres Emergency Preparedness Training Center at the rebuilt Vineyard Bluffs Resort. James Mitchell had used the post-Helena reconstruction as an opportunity to create not just a luxury hospitality venue, but also a world-class training center where hospitality professionals, event organizers, and others who work with large groups could learn basic emergency response skills. And he had named the center in her honor. The attached letter explained that the center had already trained more than 500 professionals in 3 states, and that several other resorts and event venues were planning similar centers based on the Vineyard Bluffs model. Your action on a single night literally changed an entire industry, Mitchell had written. We hope you'll accept our invitation to be the keynote speaker at the official opening. Maya showed the invitation to Ethan that night over dinner. Are you going to go? He asked. How could I not? It's rewarding to see how that terrible night resulted in something so positive and lasting, and it'll be interesting to go back to Cape Cod to see how everything was rebuilt. True. But this time, Maya said with a smile, I'm going to check the weather forecast very carefully before I go. The opening of the training center was an event completely different from the wedding that had brought Maya to Cape Cod 2 years earlier. Instead of a celebration of wealth and social status, it was a gathering of professionals dedicated to learning skills that could save lives. Maya gave a lecture to an audience of 200 people, ironically, almost the same number who had been present during Helena, about the importance of proactive preparation versus reactive response. She spoke about how small preventive actions can avert major tragedies, and how anyone in a position of responsibility for others has a duty to be prepared for emergencies. After her talk, she was approached by a young woman who looked familiar. Ms. Torres, I'm Sarah Chen. I work as an event coordinator in Chicago, and I was here that night during the hurricane. Maya remembered Sarah had been one of the people who helped carry medical supplies during the rescue operation. Sarah, how are you? Well, thank you. Actually, I wanted to tell you that night completely changed my approach to my job. I now require all my events to have a detailed emergency plan, staff trained in basic first aid, and clearly marked evacuation routes. That's wonderful. But there's more. I convinced my company to start offering emergency preparedness consulting services for other event organizers. We're helping spread safety protocols throughout the entire Midwest industry. Maya smiled, realizing once again how actions on a single night had created ripples that continued to spread years later. During the reception, after the opening, she found herself in conversation with Mitchell about how the training center had exceeded all initial expectations. Honestly, Maya, when we started planning this place, we thought it would mainly be a good marketing tool, something that would set us apart from other luxury resorts. But it became much more than that. How so? It became a movement. We have people driving in from other states to train here. We have universities sending students for certification programs. We have government organizations using our facilities to train first responders. Mitchell gestured toward the newly built facilities, which included emergency simulators, state-of-the-art training rooms, and even a pool designed specifically for practicing water rescues. What started as a training center for hospitality staff evolved into a nationally recognized emergency preparedness facility, and all because of the example you set that night. On the last night of her visit to Cape Cod, Maya walked alone to where the wedding pavilion had stood 2 years earlier. The area now housed a beautiful memorial garden with a plaque dedicated to all those who find strength in storms and show courage when it matters most. As she stood there in the ocean's gentle breeze, thinking about everything that had happened since that terrible night, she heard footsteps behind her. I thought I might find you here. It was Ethan, who had driven down from Boston to join her at the end of the event. How was today? He asked, putting his arm around her shoulders. Surreal, inspiring. Humbling in the best way, she leaned into him, feeling the solidity and warmth that had become her anchor. Seeing how that terrible night inspired so many people to make positive changes in their lives. It's more than I could have imagined. Do you have any regrets? About anything that happened? Maya considered the question honestly, thinking about the winding path that had led from Lucas's cruel invitation to this moment of recognition and renewed purpose. None, she said finally. Not even about accepting the original wedding invitation. If I hadn't gone, Lucas and Olivia would still be living superficial lives, focused on appearances. Mitchell would still be organizing events without proper safety protocols. Hundreds of hospitality professionals would never have received training that could save lives in the future, and I would never have proven to myself that I was exactly where I should be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. They were silent for a few minutes, listening to the gentle rhythm of the waves against the rocks below. The ocean that had been so violent and threatening 2 years earlier was now peaceful, beautiful, restored to the scenic tranquility that had originally drawn people to build their Ethan. Maya said eventually, "There's something I want to tell you." "What is it?" "I received another job offer this week. Disaster relief coordinator for the entire East Coast. Based in Washington, D.C., much higher salary, significant influence over national emergency policy." Ethan was quiet for a moment, and I turned it down immediately, without even considering it. "Why?" Maya turned to face him fully. "Because I learned something important that night during Helena. I learned that true fulfillment doesn't come from title or salary or recognition. It comes from being exactly who you are meant to be, no matter what anyone else thinks about it." "And who are you meant to be?" "Someone who shows up when people most need help. Someone who runs toward danger instead of away from it. Someone who saves lives one emergency at a time, one person at a time, one crisis at a time." She paused, looking back to where the pavilion had stood. "Lucas used to say I loved disasters more than I loved him. He was wrong about the comparison, but he was right that I love this work. I love being needed when everything is falling apart. I love using skills and training to make a difference when it matters most. I love being someone others can count on when their world is collapsing. And that's exactly who you should be," Ethan said simply. As they walked back to the car, Maya thought about all the people whose lives had been changed by a single night of courage under pressure. Lucas had learned to value substance over appearances. Olivia had discovered inner strength she never knew she possessed. Mitchell had transformed his business to prioritize safety over aesthetics. Dozens of other wedding guests had returned home with a renewed appreciation for preparedness and community responsibility, and she had learned that sometimes the most important invitations are the ones that initially seem designed to hurt us. Sometimes we have to step into situations that look like traps to discover they are actually opportunities to prove our worth to ourselves and to the world. As they drove away from Cape Cod for the last time, Maya felt a sense of completeness that went beyond professional satisfaction. She had been invited to be humiliated at her ex-husband's wedding. Instead, she had saved lives, inspired career changes, influenced public policies, and definitively proved that she was exactly who she had always known she was: strong, competent, and absolutely essential when things got hard. Sometimes, she thought as Boston's skyline appeared ahead of them, the universe has a very sophisticated sense of justice. And sometimes, just sometimes, being completely and unapologetically yourself is the most powerful answer to anyone who tries to make you feel small. Maya Torres had gone to a wedding where she was destined to be a failure. She left as a heroine whose impact would continue to spread through waves of positive change for years. And that, she decided, was the best kind of victory possible, one that lifted everyone up instead of tearing anyone down. Folks, what an incredible transformation. Maya proved her worth when it truly mattered, and now even those who doubted her are offering opportunities. But will she choose money or follow her heart? Tell us in the comments, do you think she made the right decision? And don't forget to like and subscribe for more emotional stories like this.